Okay, we're moving into disciplining students with disabilities, and of course, that is an important component of the law. Here you see Chapter 14, which is Pennsylvania regulations, but certainly disciplining students with disabilities is in the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Chapter 14 are our regulations of that particular law. So we all know that all children deserve a safe, well-disciplined school and an orderly learning environment. And that as educators, though, we need the tools to prevent problems from occurring. So the law seeks this balanced approach between safe schools and providing FAPE, meaning that all children need to be safe and learning. So there's a balance, and so that when a child with a disability exhibits a behavior, we need to have a behavior intervention plan in place as part of that individualized education plan for the child. So, in the reauthorization in 1997 of IDEA, we start to really focus in on discipline. And the law at that time and continues to emphasize positive behavioral supports. And school officials certainly may discipline students with disabilities in the same manner as they discipline students without disabilities, but there are a few exceptions, and a discipline must be addressed in the IEP. So, what are some examples of procedural violations that may occur if we're not doing it right? So, failing to conduct a functional behavioral assessment and are developing the behavior intervention plan, suspending a student without providing notice to the family, suspending a student with disabilities in excess of 10 consecutive school days, failing to conduct a manifestation determination after suspending a student for 10 consecutive days, or changing the child's placement, changing a student's placement without using the procedural mechanisms of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and suspending a student indefinitely or serially. What are some examples of other violations, or what's called substantive violations? So in the law, there could be procedural violations, there could be substantive violations. Failing to address the behavior in the IEP is substantial. Conducting a functional behavioral assessment that does not address the function of the behavior. Developing a behavior intervention plan that is entirely reactive instead of positive or proactive, and failing to provide a free appropriate public education during the suspension, the expulsion, or in an interim alternative educational setting. So, in terms of school-wide discipline, students with disabilities are subject to school-wide discipline procedures. The exceptions when procedures deprive the students of their special education. That cannot happen. The trigger of the procedural safeguards of the IDEA, and it interferes with the student's IEP, behavior intervention plan, or Section 504. So we have to make sure that, yes, we follow school-wide discipline procedures, but we can't interfere with the child's special education in any way. So we have to ensure compliance in our schools, and when appropriate, use the same discipline procedures, but we have to make sure we are addressing the child's, again, IEP or Section 504 plan. We have to make sure that we understand the process of manifestation determination, and what does that mean, and how do we proceed with manifestation determination. And we have to make sure, again, that we're in compliance. If a student's behavior negatively affects his or her learning or the learning of others, the IEP team shall consider strategies including positive behavior support and that address the behaviors. So what behaviors? Based on the law, we can infer any disruptive behavior that interferes with teaching and learning. So that's a given. Noncompliance, destroying of property, and physical and verbal abuse and aggression. The behavioral part of the IEP is no different, really, but it includes the behavioral goals. Um, the parents do not have to do anything, just like in any other part of the IEP. Um, so it's about what the schools need to do. The IEP identifies the hierarchy or processes that occur, and that's outlined in the behavior plan. And it has to be a proactive and skill building plan. When a student engages in problem behavior, we have to determine if the behavior is impeding his or her learning. And if yes, we need to conduct an assessment of that behavior and develop a plan based on that assessment that will address the behavior and increase socially acceptable behaviors. In terms of addressing problem behavior, we know that the assessment, an important assessment that we do, is the functional behavioral assessment. And from that, we're developing our goals that will include how we monitor the child as well. And some of the goals will be skill building in nature, and so they will become part of that IEP. A functional behavioral assessment will require us to collect a lot of data to determine the function of the problem behavior. Because problem behavior is typically purposeful, we can't change it unless we try to discover what the function of it is. What's the purpose of the behavior that the child is exhibiting? And then the goal of the functional behavioral assessment is to gather information that reliably predicts and maintains what behavior is maintaining the problem behavior, I should say. If the local education agency did not conduct a functional behavioral assessment and implement a behavior intervention plan before the behavior that resulted in the suspension of the agency has to convene the IEP team to develop an assessment plan to address that behavior. Or if the child already has a behavioral intervention plan, the IEP team shall review the plan and modify it. So that's taken directly from our regulations and the federal law. So essentially what we're saying here is that we need to make sure we're assessing appropriately and that the plan is appropriate, so that the plan may already be in place, but it may not be meeting the child's needs. So when is this functional behavior assessment required? So the law, talks about it, but when is it required? It's required when it has been determined in a manifestation determination that a student's behavior is related to his or her misconduct. When a student is removed for more than 10 days for misconduct that was determined not to be a manifestation of the student's disability. When an FBA was not conducted before the misconduct that resulted in a change of placement. So those are the when it's required, and from that we develop a behavior intervention plan if it's not already in place. And so it's based on the FBA, and we must consider behavioral supports, positive behavioral interventions. It's not just a reactive discipline plan, so that's important. If not in the IEP, the plan must be written within 10 days of the disciplinary action. And the primary purpose of the behavior intervention plan is to teach appropriate skills or replacement behaviors. So a behavior intervention plan must address the function of the behavior, the inappropriate behavior that has to be reduced, what will happen when the inappropriate behavior is exhibited, what is the appropriate replacement behavior to be taught, what will happen when the correct behavior is exhibited, and how we will keep data on these behavioral goals. So that concludes part 1.